I'm joined in the studio by representatives of relatives, investigators and analysts from both sides of the Atlantic. After the break, we'll be discussing the issues raised in the film you've just seen. Join us then.
Now I need a little help.
If, like Rex, you detest weeds, here is Roundup, a biodegradable weed killer. It penetrates through the weed and destroys it from the inside right down to the roots, without harming the soil. Roundup, biodegradable weed killer, leaving Rex free to enjoy his bone.
Well, I reckon it's that dodgy inlet valve again, Dad. That one.
I thought you two could do with a break.
Ah, tea for the workers, eh, Dad? Hold on a minute. Those aren't proper mini rolls. He won't like them. He's such an old fusspot.
At Safeway, we're so confident about the quality of all our own brand products that if you don't prefer them, we'll give you your money back and a replacement.
Oh, no, he likes them.
Oh, they're very good.
Well, that's a bit of a shame, actually. I'd already worked out what to spend the refund on.
Refund and replace at Safeway.
We got the mountains, the rivers and trees, Mother Nature gives us the glory.
Hops, barley, yeast, water. That's it. Hops, barley, yeast, water. That's it. Just those. Just lager. Delicious, full-flavored, authentic Holsten Pils. Just as nature. You shut up! I'm talking over here. Let me put it this way. I don't drink lager with a splash of additives. I don't drink lager with a preservative top. I don't drink lager in a stabilizer shandy. Why? Because I treat my body like a temple. That's why I leave the boots on the outside. What are you looking at?
To reduce the risk of gum disease, you must remove plaque daily. With its oscillating cup-shaped brush head, Braun Oral-B plaque remover is clinically proven to help reduce plaque. Not that everyone will be able to appreciate it. The Braun Oral-B plaque remover for effective daily brushing.
Heartburn. Get BiSoDol Heartburn. Fast-acting relief plus a special ingredient for lasting protection. It acts fast and lasts.
An easy-to-follow advertisement for your easy-to-use Delta card. A lot of people already use their Delta card to pay for groceries. Well, hey, great news. Delta is welcome at stacks more places. For example, pharmacies, stationers, and hairdressers. And that's not just a load of old nonsense. Visa's Delta 2 checks.
Somebody pinch me. I still don't believe it. Loft extension with turrets, I think. New wheels.
Every day, thousands of savers receive a cheque from Legal & General.
I knew it was a good idea of mine.
This ray of sunshine was brought to you by the big company with the umbrella.
Wonder what she'd say to a pool table. Wonder what he'd say to a pool.
It's all worked out beautifully with the new Laguna.
How do you define Channel 4 News?
Accessible, enlightening, sharp, newshounds with pedigree, bringing the day's events into focus, offering a new angle on current issues, with headlines at 7 and 7:30. News daily from the four corners of the globe. This is Channel 4 News. Make a point of watching it.
Now on 4, victims' families and those involved in the making of the Maltese Double-Cross are brought together for Lockerbie, the debate.
Welcome back. The film that you've just seen claims to tell a very complicated story of plots, subplots and cover-ups at the highest level. 3 main questions emerge from that film. Is a film part funded from Libyan-based sources inevitably undermined by that association? Secondly, do the film's claims and suggestions carry weight? And thirdly, will the families of the victims ever see justice done? To debate these questions, I'm joined by Alan Frankovich, the writer and director of the Maltese Double-Cross. Dr. Jim Swire, whose daughter Flora died on Pan Am 103. He's spokesman for the British Families Support Group. Frank Dugan, who advised the 1990 US President's Commission on Aviation Security and Terrorism. So far the only public inquiry into Lockerbie. Now he advises several of the families of the US victims. Shahram Chubin of the Geneva School of International Studies. David Leppard of the Sunday Times. He wrote a book on Lockerbie in 1991, which closely followed the Scottish police investigation. Sir Teddy Taylor MP, who's raised questions about Lockerbie in Parliament and in meetings with Colonel Gaddafi. And by satellite from Dallas, Texas, Oliver Buck-Revell, who, as you saw in the film, led the FBI investigation into Lockerbie. In this discussion, we'll look at 3 main areas: how the film came to be made, the issues it raises, and where we go from here. So let's start with how the film came to be made. Now, money for the development and making of this film came from a company which is part owned by Libya. Critics insist that the film's arguments are undermined by that connection. Jim Swire, can I ask you, first of all, whether you think the funding sources undermine the film's integrity?
Certainly. I remember what a member of our group said the first time this film was shown in the House of Commons. She said, "I don't give a damn if Adolf Hitler funded this film. The questions it raises need to be answered. We don't know the truth. We don't know whether this is the truth or whether the official version is the truth. Let's get down to answering the question." That
would be your view as well?
Absolutely.
And do you think, for all the British families?
Not necessarily all of them, but the active members of our group all feel that the British public should have a right to make their own minds up about this and to compare it with the official version. And in many ways, I have to say it, I think Mr. Frankovich's synthesis of the facts fits rather better and explains the apparent cover-up rather better than the official version seems to do.
Frank Dugan, speaking for some of the US families as you do, that, as I understand it, is not their opinion.
No, I don't know how many of them have seen it. A great deal of them have seen it, but I think it's of great concern that the movie was apparently paid for by Libyan interest. That's a violation of our embargo, our law, for one thing. But secondly, we're just concerned that there are facts that the American families, I think, are content that were addressed by our commission that still seem to be open, not only in England but in this film.
So, as far as your concern about the funding, or the family's concern about the funding goes, it's simply because it breaks the law.
No, it's more than that. I mean, I think there's been I think this is just part of a series of disinformation by Colonel Gaddafi to point the blame at everyone else.
That's what you think, but
and I think the families believe that also. The ones that I've talked to, the ones who have seen this film.
Dr. Swire, what would you say to those families via Frank Dugan?
I'm surprised to hear the question of breach of American law raised. I wonder, for instance, whether Mr. Dugan feels that the bombing of Tripoli in '86 was a breach of American or indeed international law. I rather think that it was. But setting aside the legal question, I've, as you know, met with Gaddafi myself, and I don't know what is open to Libya to do, because it seems to me that Libya has been categorized as virtually the devil incarnate, and the Libyans I've talked to have seemed like other people, part good, part bad. And they say that they weren't involved in this, but the only way to prove or disprove that, or the best way, is to have a fair trial. And the thing that angers me most at the moment is that for 3 years we have been waiting for a trial of the 2 people accused in the official version. And all we get from the government is the government has decided that there is no need to have a trial in a neutral country. I would have thought the absence of the presence of the Libyans for a trial in this country dictated the need for a trial in a neutral country.
Now, that issue we will come on to later on in this discussion, but just sticking with this point about the funding, because there's been much criticism, particularly this week, of the film because of its funding. Sir Teddy Taylor, you too have spoken with Colonel Gaddafi on a number of occasions. Now, arguably, he has real interests in seeing this film's exculpation of the 2 indicted Libyans gain support, but doesn't the nature of the funding of the film actually reduce its status to that of propaganda
It doesn't
exercise?
reduce it. Mr. Frankovich was free to do what he wanted, and of course he'll tell us for himself. If in fact he was told by, I think it's Metropole Hotels, which is partly owned by a British company,
Indeed,
and partly owned by the Libyans, if he was told by them what to say, that's different. But basically all that's happened is the issue has been looked at again, and almost every year you have something new, frightening and worrying come up of this thing. All I'm concerned about is saying, when on earth can we hear the truth? And my feeling is that anyone who can help to have the debate advanced in some way, to try and bring it to conclusion, to find the facts, it's worthwhile. So I think, really, what I would say is I'd have rather it had been done by Channel 4 television, of course, but the crucial thing is are the facts true or untrue?
So as long as Mr. Frankovich got the
and
kind
was
of
Mr. Frankovich
independence
free? And that's the whole issue.
Before I come to you, Alan Frankovich, can I go to David Leppard? Now, working as a journalist for the Sunday Times, you were very critical, or implicitly critical, of the film's funding in an article that you wrote this weekend. You said the British public must know about the funding of this film. But do you not accept Sir Teddy Taylor's point that as long as Mr. Frankovich has independence in his making, that the funding is not in itself a problem?
Well, I think the issue here is whether, as a journalist, Mr. Frankovich felt he had some sort of professional obligation to declare the involvement of a company which is connected to Libya in the funding of his own professional work. And I think, having watched the programme and the credits, although there is a reference to Tiny Rowlands, the former chief executive of Lonrho, in the credits at the end, there's no reference to the fact that there is a Libyan interest behind this film.
Well, there's been no, it is now in the public arena, it has been part funded. Now, as I understand it, Alan Frankovich, you have not aimed to conceal the funding of this film, and certainly now everybody knows, Channel 4's made it perfectly clear that it is part funded by Libyan money.
Well, I'd like to point out that there were stories which appeared last year that there was Libyan funding in this film, and there is no Libyan funding in this film, I repeat it. This project was debated by the Lonrho Board of Directors, and it's a public record matter that the Libyans invested money several years ago with the permission of the British government in a subsidiary of Lonrho. This was debated by the Lonrho Board of Directors, approved unanimously as a Lonrho project, and they then decided what entity to establish. And I had worked before for Lonrho. Lonrho owned the Observer newspaper and the Observer Film Company. And I was brought in because of my association with the Observer and asked by Mr. Rowland whether I would do a film on Lockerbie, and I said I would if I had complete and total control over it. And he gave me that, and Mr. Rowland did not see the film until September of last year.
So you have independent control over the film, but just for clarification, are you denying then that Metropole Hotels, part owned by Libya, had any direct funding application to this film?
The money came from Lonrho. Metropole Hotels is a subsidiary of Lonrho, and they set up a company for this production because they could not use the Observer Film Company or the Observer. They had sold it on to the Guardian. But the implication is that there was money that came from Libya for this film, and there was no money that came from Libya. And then when Lonrho withdrew its backing, again in December, a vote with the Board of Directors, Mr. Rowland stepped in, and he completed the funding, and he owns the film, essentially.
So there was no Libyan money, in your view, in
No,
this
there's
film?
money that was invested in Lonrho years ago by the Libyan Arab Investment Company. That's public record. and HEMAR was set up by them. It was their choice what entity to set up. I was not involved. Even Mr. Leppard, who was warned that there would be a libel action if the statement was made that this was funded by Libyan money. It's corrected now, and that is accurate.
Right.
Lonro has a Libyan investment in it.
David,
that's known by everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I accept that we mustn't say that the film was directly funded by Libya. But I did interview Tiny Rowlands last week, and he did tell me that the film was part and parcel of a deal that he and Lonro struck with Colonel Gaddafi. Now, those are his words, which we quoted in the newspaper. And all I say is that as an independent journalist, you have a professional obligation to make clear any sources of any funding for your film, if they could be seen to conflict with other interests.
Well, we've heard Mr. Frankovich's description of the funding, so I'd like to leave it there because there are more material issues to be debated, or rather, because there are people, Jim Swire, who say that there is nothing to be debated and that this is irrelevant. There are official conclusions, and that's that.
Well, I think nature abhors a vacuum, and those official conclusions have been in existence and known now for over 3 years. And during that time, of course, things have not stood still, and others, apart from Mr. Frankovich, have produced evidence to suggest that maybe the official version isn't right. And the more that happens, the more difficult does it remain to believe, particularly in the link between Malta and Frankfurt Airport.
Alan Frankovich's film was full of the issues that we're going to discuss, and we're going to look in detail at some of those issues that won't go away after this short break.
Wonderful idea of yours, Atkins, to test the new luxury Astra CDX in the desert.
Yes, it was because of my idea for the air conditioning, you see.
How could I forget it?
And the CDJD, the MD loved that idea.
I'll bet she did. Oh, but Atkins, we're forgetting that other great idea of yours.
Oh, what?
Well, comparing the luxury of driving a CDX against a more basic form of transport.
Oh, yes. Are you sure this is my idea, JD?
Oh, come, Atkins. Modesty.
Oh. Sorry, JD. Oh, just a wee second. Wait a wee second. Oh.
Why a pair of 3D glasses? That's to get a better view of Colgate's first three-dimensional toothbrush. You see, your teeth aren't flat. They're three-dimensional. That's why the unique Colgate Total was created. The first layer of bristles are shorter to clean the surface of the teeth. Colgate Total also has a second layer of bristles. These are a little longer to clean right in between your teeth. Why am I standing at this angle? Well, that's the third dimension. Angled bristles to gently clean plaque away from the gum line. Try Colgate Total for a three-dimensional clean.
Well, I reckon it's that dodgy inlet valve again, Dad. That one.
I thought you two could do with a break.
Oh, tea for the workers, eh, Dad? Hold on a minute. Those aren't proper mini rolls. He won't like them. He's such an old fusspot.
At Safeway, we're so confident about the quality of all our own brand products that if you don't prefer them, we'll give you your money back and a replacement.
Oh, no, he likes them.
Try one. They're very good.
Well, that's a bit of a shame, actually. I'd already worked out what to spend the refund on.
Refund and replace at Safeway.
Welcome back. The issues raised in Alan Frankovich's film have been discussed and explored by interested parties over the years, and the investigating authorities claim to have looked at them and dismissed them. But they have not, as Dr. Jim Swire has just told us, been dismissed by the families of the victims. So let's now discuss in greater detail the main questions raised. Firstly, was Libya alone responsible, or were Iran and Syria to blame, or did all three have a hand in the bombing? Did the US investigators seek to cover up a botched covert drugs operation? And finally, was there a political reason to blame Libya, and was political pressure applied? All very large questions, gentlemen. Let's start off with that first one, the suggestion that Iran and Syria and not Libya were responsible for the bombing. Now, Shahram Chubin, is it feasible that Iran and Syria could be behind the bombing and indeed had reason to be?
Well, the first line of inquiry, I think, focused on Iran and Syria because there was an apparent fearful symmetry between what happened in Lockerbie and what had happened a few months earlier in the Persian Gulf with a Persian airliner, so that Iran was thought plausibly to have a motivation. Syria's motivation...
That was the Airbus that was...
The Iranian civilian Airbus that strayed into the Gulf and got shot down by an American warship. And statements were made at the time by leaders that there would be revenge, and this would not go unpunished. Subsequently, because of their mutual relationship in Libya, it was assumed that Syria and Iran, that had cooperated with Hezbollah, might cooperate in some type of revenge activity. Syria's motivations weren't altogether clear. So I think it was a plausible line of inquiry, but apparently was ditched by the investigators when they couldn't find enough evidence to sustain it.
Buck Revel in Dallas, as Mr. Chubin has said, early evidence suggested that Iran and Syria were responsible, and your initial investigation pursued that direction. What changed your mind?
Well, that's exactly correct. The most logical premise that we had initially was that Iran, through various surrogates, perhaps Hezbollah, perhaps others, or the PFLP-GC under Ahmad Jibril, had carried out a revenge attack for the Vincennes, a very unfortunate Vincennes incident. There was a great deal to add to that by what the German authorities had uncovered in the Autumn Leaves investigation of Jibril's organization in Germany. We proceeded on the basis that that was our primary suspect group, and that the country that had the most to gain immediately from the terrible bombing of Pan Am 103 was in fact Iran. As we proceeded, the forensic evidence simply did not support that, and then eyewitness testimony later corroborated what the forensic evidence had led us to. So although there was a great deal of interest in this country to hold Iran responsible, the criminal investigation and the forensic investigation simply did not support it in the long run.
So was it the case that Libyan responsibility in fact became more likely as the investigation proceeded, and therefore you stopped following the Iranian and Syrian leads?
Well, we never stopped following leads at any time, and in fact, even today, the investigation remains open as to whether there were others involved. Certainly, there's a possibility that Libya was acting on consignment from Iran, but there's no evidence of that. Until the two defendants are surrendered and tried, we may never know who was ultimately behind. But what we do know is that the two Libyans carried out the bombing and that they had to act upon the authority of Gaddafi.
Well, you say you know that. That certainly is the charge. And when the indictment was presented, the American spokesman said this was a Libyan operation from start to finish. Is that your view?
I don't think you can say to finish. I think that that was perhaps too definitive. I believe that you never know the end of the case until you get to the end of the case. But
what can you say from start in that case?
Well, from the start, we presumed that Libya was a suspect because they had engaged in terrorist acts and they had also reasons for revenge. But Iran and the Ahmad Jibril group were the focus of our early attention, at least the most of our attention.
Now, you saw Alan Frankovich's film in which he presents new evidence in support of the theory that a mechanism existed by which a bomb was placed on Pan Am 103 in Frankfurt. And his evidence is that a passenger met a known and now imprisoned Syrian-backed terrorist. Are you open-minded enough to follow up that new evidence?
If there was evidence, we would. I'm no longer with the FBI. I'm retired and do private security consulting, but there was no evidence in this documentary. There was fabrications and there was false information. There was the use of fabricators and people who are known to have been con men in the past. Unfortunately, Mr. Frankovich, like some other journalists, including in the United States, has been taken in by people who have a hidden agenda.
Okay, well, can we be specific? Because if you're accusing Mr. Frankovich of fabrications, that is a heavy charge. Specifically on this particular issue, that Iran and Syria were not involved, where do you see the fabrications?
I did not accuse Mr. Frankovich of fabrications. I said he's using as sources people who are known fabricators and who did provide false information in this regard. Unfortunately, I'm still bound by my oath as far as the evidence, and I can't comment other than the fact to say that the evidence was clear in the United States before a grand jury of 26 independent individuals who do not have any tie to the government, and the same is true for the Scottish system where indictments were also returned.
Without any precision, then, Mr. Revell suggests that you've, at the very least, been taken in by fabricators Alan Frankovich. Now, how do you refute that?
What I would like to do, I'm going to read a letter from someone in the Central Intelligence Agency who knows Mr. Leppard. His name is Nathan Miller Adams.
Can I just ask you if it's a long letter, bearing in mind the length
No,
of time?
I'm not going to read. I'm just going to read selections
Right.
from you. Mr. Adams was a National Intelligence officer. He sat on the Central Intelligence Agency's group on terrorism. And this letter is written to Mr. Yuval Aviv, June 19th, 1993. And he says, and we will get into Mr. Aviv later because he's one of the fabricators at Buck Revell.
Mr. Yuval Aviv appeared in the film. He's one of your witnesses.
And we will use the FBI's own document showing that the FBI concluded that Yuval Aviv was working as a full-time intelligence agent for Israel. And they had a confidential relationship with him until 90, and in 93 they wanted to reactivate it. And we're presenting those documents to the press tomorrow. Mr. Miller Adams says to Mr. Aviv, my own conclusions parallel many of your own. They are based on interviews I conducted with several trusted sources, two of them whom enjoy high-level access with the Iranian government. Clearly, the official report was intended to focus blame upon Libya, rather than identify Iran as the instigator of the conspiracy and Syria as sympathetic profiteer. Justice, of course, was sacrificed in the interests of the Desert Storm Coalition. It goes on to say...
Who is this from?
This is from Nathan Miller Adams.
Mr. Adams was never a part of any of the ranking structure of the CIA. I dealt with those people, and he was not a part of this.
Checked, and he was a national
Mr. Charles Allen was the NIO for terrorism.
Let me continue, if you will permit me, Mr. Revell.
Well, I just don't know who this person is you're talking about.
Well, I do know who it is, and I will...
If you don't know who he is, how do you know he wasn't working for you? That's very strange.
Well, he retired recently from the Central Intelligence Agency.
Let's take the concluding portion of the letter that you want to read out, Mr. Frankovich.
One expert who agrees with me is David Leppard, deputy editor of the Sunday Times Insight team. We have both voiced our concerns and convictions on several forums. And it goes on to say that none of these government officials will speak for the record at the present juncture.
Let me just check with David Lepper that that's an accurate representation of his views.
Well, I'm wondering whether Nathan Adams will accept that. I mean, Nathan Adams is a journalist with Reader's Digest, as you must know.
Well, he was with the Central Intelligence Agency as well.
No, he was not.
Yes, he was.
No. Jim Swire?
Never involved in Lockerbie, he was not.
He wasn't involved in Lockerbie, but he worked with the Central Intelligence Agency.
Jim Swire.
Buck, can I have a word with you? Excuse me calling you Buck, but you've okayed it.
That's fine, please do.
But first of all, I understand you're from Oklahoma City, and let me express my sympathy for the relatives of those killed there, being a relative of Lockerbie myself. I think the problem is that in Britain, at least, we have a healthy skepticism about the integrity of our intelligence services. And one of the problems we have is that two successive prime ministers have refused any kind of objective inquiry into what intelligence was doing over Lockerbie. And we have the added problem that so far as American intelligence is concerned, the name of Oliver North keeps cropping up. And we see in Mr. Frankovich's film, Mr. Canestraro, with whom I believe you at one time were fairly closely associated, and after whom you had to perhaps correct some of the problems left by he and Oliver North. But quite honestly, to see Mr. Canestraro talking about Oliver North on the film and describing him as someone who's prepared to lie in order to achieve his immediate target doesn't fill us with confidence about how American intelligence may have acted. You know, it doesn't fill us with confidence when we as citizens cannot penetrate in any way what you guys are doing. I'm not calling you a liar or anything. I just want you to understand that that is a problem. One other question before I finish with you, sir. I understand that your son was booked to fly on that plane. Why did he not get on the plane? Can you tell us that?
Well,
I'm delighted that he didn't, but why didn't he?
My son was in Germany in the Army, and his wife and his wife came home early. He was able to get leave 2 weeks earlier, so this was 2 weeks before that he was able actually to come home. It had absolutely nothing to do with what happened. It was just a tragic ironic consequence. Obviously, I'm delighted he was not on board, but I had absolutely no information, and I was in charge of FBI operations about Pan Am 103, nor would I ever allow anyone's children to be on a flight that I knew was in jeopardy.
We'll come on to the question of warnings later, but on the specific comment that Jim Swire made on skepticism about intelligence services, your comment, Mr. Nouvelle.
Well, first place, the intelligence services did not run this investigation. The law enforcement agencies did, the Scottish police and the FBI. Secondly, we have to produce evidence, not raw intelligence, that a jury and a grand jury and prosecutors can present in open court. Third, in the United States, the President did appoint a commission, and there was an independent inquiry that took it as far as it could go without going into the evidentiary issues which have to be adjudicated under both British and American law in the court of law. As far as Oliver North, he had already left long before the Pan Am 103 incident and was not involved in any sort of national security affairs. And as far as Mr. Canestraro, although he was initially involved on the CIA side, he had retired a full year before the indictment was brought against Libya. So all of this is essentially a fabrication and has nothing to do with the facts of the situation.
Now, there are differences of opinion about the credibility of the witnesses, but quite aside from the people that you spoke to, Alan Frankovich, you also suggested a mechanism by which the bomb was placed on Pan Am 103 at Frankfurt. And that involved a drugs connection, which you allege was being run by American authorities, running drugs from the Lebanon to the United States, a covert drugs operation. This is a fairly extraordinary thing to ask people to believe in the first place, but you go further. You ask people to believe that there was a subsequent interagency cover-up of what was arguably a botched drugs operation, if there was a drugs operation. And then the US agencies compete with each other to the point where agents of one agency may in fact be sacrificed because they're not willing to exchange information. These are three incredible charges, and yet you claim to have the evidence.
Well, we present the evidence in the film. And for instance, Oliver North was running an operation in the Bekaa Valley using the Drug Enforcement Agency starting as early as 1984. And the first reference I've seen to this is in a book by Con Coughlin. I have with me documents from the National Security Council in which they are discussing operations using Drug Enforcement Agency agents inside the Bekaa, which, as Mr. Nouvelle knows, is a center for terrorism and for drug dealing. And these operations are going on in 84, 85, 86, and in 88. And Cyprus was the pivot point, and we have the national security documents, which are not in the film. And that operation was penetrated very early on by the other side. The Syrians control the Bekaa. They have the relationships with Hezbollah. The Iranians have their bases there. And that's what happened. And I'd like to point out that there are members of the Jafar family who appear in the film. We got a camera crew into secret Ahmed Jibril Hezbollah meetings, something that no one has done, under the noses of the Syrians, and the members of the Jafar family tried to present that evidence, and I have the correspondence, in March 1989. I have the letters of the go-between to the FBI, to the President of the United States, and to members of the United States Congress. And there was no, and this was before, by the way, this was before the controversial fabricators appeared on the scene, like Lester Coleman and Yuval Aviv, and we'll get into that issue.
Are you saying that Lester Coleman is a fabricator?
No, I'm not saying. This is what
controversial fabricators is a quotation.
I'm using that as a quotation.
All right. Leaving aside Lester Coleman, who appears in the film as one of your witnesses, who has been described as a fabricator, just for a moment, the other charges, the drugs connection, which Alan Frankovich describes by Nouvelle, can you refute that?
Well, he's correct in the fact that DEA assets, not agents, but DEA assets, were tasked by orders from the National Security Council to try and develop information on the American hostages in Lebanon. They were not used in conjunction with Pan Am 103. That entire operation had been closed down, and there were no DEA assets used in the investigation of Pan Am 103.
So there was a legitimate drugs operation being run by DEA between the Lebanon and the United States?
There was intelligence being gathered and operations conducted against drug operations, but there was not a crossover except on the hostage issue when all assets of the American government were directed towards trying to determine the location of the hostages so that they could be freed under one means or another.
Now, Frank Dugan, I suggest that is an incredible thing, but it is the case, it is a fact. Is it not impossible then that that kind of operation could not have been infiltrated in the way that's suggested in Alan Frankovich's film?
I don't know. I was not aware of that whole drug operation.
So this is fresh information to you. You weren't aware that there was such a legitimate drug, or well, legitimate according to U.S. law, covert operation.
Well, subsequently, from the public record, there were anti-drug operations going on, but they were not going on at that time, and it is just another something that's being thrown into the pot to keep stirred up. I mean, I just don't believe that these kinds of things are relevant.
It's never been denied.
Shara Chubin, it is perfectly. I mean, we've heard from Buck Ravel. It was happening. It is. He's given us the proof, so I don't have to ask him if it's feasible that Hezbollah would cooperate in this kind of deal.
Well, then, I think the point is to make two or three points. One, I think there have been controlled operations. Whether they were occurring at that time in that place isn't clear. It's suggested it isn't. It wasn't the case. Secondly, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, PFLP, GC, etc., are not so dedicated that they're not open to the highest bidder. They are freelancers as well. Sometimes several countries, Syria, Iran, and Libya, use the PFLP, GC at different times, and perhaps even at overlapping times. But what I'd like to address very briefly is the proposition underlying all of this, because if there was a mechanism for drugs which was infiltrated with a bomb, the motivation which was outlined by Mr. Frankovich seems extraordinarily weak. That the overriding necessity of Desert Storm meant that the United States, in order to get Iran to be neutral in that crisis, that is, not oppose its activities against Iraq, was to go soft vis-a-vis Iran. But this is the point. Iran and Iraq had an 8-year war. It was in Iran's interest to support the Allies to weaken Iraq, just as it was Syria's interest. There was really no pressing reason why Washington should bribe these two countries to stay neutral or to support its policies.
Alan Frankovich.
The United States had a back-channel operation with Iran, as you know, going back to Robert McFarlane. Oliver North was meeting with the Iranians. They were making deals with them. And there are several people who had very sensitive information about this, including an Israeli by the name of Amarin Nir, a Brit by the name of Ian Spiro, and Cyrus Hashimi, all who died very mysterious deaths. And it was much beyond just trying to get the Iranians neutral. And I'd like to point out that the Americans have intercepts of radio communications with the Iranian embassy, congratulating the Iranian embassy in Beirut for conducting the operation. After it happened, there was a sum of money which was actually delivered to the PFLP-GC. There are also communications dealing with that. And the Iranians said, as you yourself have said, that they were going to get revenge. You know the Iranians are quite determined. And I have heard terrible stories that the Iranians at one point proclaimed that they were going to bring down 10 American aircraft. 10 for 1 was their motto.
But in light of all this, why hasn't the United States reacted?
Because the United States had back channels. Iran is a very big country, and if you remember in the film, Mr. Howard Tiger with the National Security Council makes the point that it's very easy to push Libya around, it's not so easy to push Syria around, or Iran. And Mr. Tiger, by the way, was on the National Security Council when Mr. Canestraro was on it.
Let me bring in Sir Teddy Taylor. Mr. Chubin expresses grave scepticism about Alan Frankovich's citing of that political pressure that might occasion some change in the focus for identifying the bombers. Did you sense the kind of pressure that he describes in the film, that Mr. Chubin is sceptical about, and indeed, are you aware of any evidence for it?
Well, yes, it's obvious, I think, to everyone. It was, in fact, the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq. We all know well that happened in 1990, and that's when it all changed rather suddenly. Now, of course,
well,
if in fact...
we must be specific on dates, because...
I'll be quite specific. August 1990 was the invasion. I think that's generally agreed. Mm-hmm. And we had the beginning of the "it's only Libya" thing 2 months later, starting in the New York Times, and I've got a copy of that cutting. Now, that was clear and precise. Now, I can understand, please don't think I'm in any sense anti-American, the very opposite. But on the other hand, it's obvious that if you have a great deal of evidence, and we understand from what was said in the film, which may or may not be true, the American ambassador already gone to Syria and say, look, your chaps did it. If you had a situation that you had the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, then clearly you needed the help of Syria. You needed to some degree not to have hostility to Iran, and there was Libya as the perfect third party.
But are you
now, we all know
suggesting
Libya has been involved in many troubles in the past, a kind of wholesaler for terrorism, and so that was the answer. Now, what I'm saying is that that's the view I had at the time. It's probably known, I think, by our friends here. I've been into trouble to some degree for saying this consistently, but almost every day there's new evidence pointing to that, and my view is simply that that changed the picture. And I think from the point of view of the United States government, it was obviously, and in Britain's case too, far more convenient not to have Syria and Iran as the guilty parties, but to have instead old Libya, which was certainly not highly regarded by either America or by Britain at that time.
Now, David Leppard, in your book, you started off with the Iran-Syrian trail, and then you leapt to the Libyan connection. Do you think that you were duped by the kind of pressures which Sir Teddy Taylor has been convinced about for years?
Well, of course, I don't think I was duped. No journalist likes to think that. My book was really trying to trace the story of the investigation and how it changed from one theory to another. And I think that's what this debate is about today. Now, what Sir Teddy has just said is that there was a remarkable coincidence, possibly, between the sudden shift in the investigation towards blaming Libya only and what was happening in strategic circles with the Gulf War. Now, the one thing that I thought was really significant about the film, and something I didn't know before, was the discovery of the forensic evidence which clearly indicated a Libyan involvement in the Lockerbie bombing. Was made in June 1990, June the 16th, if I remember rightly, by Tom Thurman, the FBI bomb expert. Now, that happened at least 6 or 7 weeks before the Gulf crisis erupted. And if Mr. Thurman is telling the truth, and I have no reason to suggest that he isn't, then there can be no connection whatsoever between the two events that Sir Teddy has just tried to link.
I say, but why was it that, in fact, you had the invasion in August? Nothing at all was indicated of the Libyan being chosen out until the New York Times in December. Now, that's a fact, and you know that, David. Now, all I'm
But
saying...
you're talking about what was in the public domain rather than
in the public domain, yes, but also, of course, in the attitudes of the government ministers, the attitudes of others speaking about the issue. Now, quite honestly, there's a lot of evidence which can suddenly appear and people can talk about. I would suggest, with all due respect to Mr. Leppard, who I respect the work he's done on this, it was clear there was a fundamental change, and it wasn't just a change to say it's Libya involvement. It was basically, so far as we know, it was only Libya. And of course, there have been different interpretations of it that basically said there's no evidence which is indictable apart from Libya. Now, quite frankly, when you hear all the new evidence coming forward, including the evidence in that film, now this is either, again, true or not true. You had a former president of Iran on that film who said, we paid for the job, and he says who he paid it, a group in Syria. Now, either that's true or it's not true, and quite honestly, I would say that kind of situation should make you think. I'm not saying I know anything. All I can say, having watched it year by year, it worries me sick. And the ones that worries me most about are the people who lost their lives. If only the two governments would say, well, if there's doubt about it, why not have this great trial in The Hague, which can happen very soon indeed, if only they'll agree to it.
Buck Revell, the point that Teddy Taylor makes there that stings is that the focus has moved entirely to Libya and away from Iran and Syria. Now, you suggested that Iran and Syria are still of interest to you, and yet what was very clear at the time we're discussing was that Iran and Syria were suddenly, and it seems conveniently, if you go along with Sir Teddy Taylor's line, no longer in the picture. They were not potential culprits. It does look fishy, to say the least.
Well, it doesn't really if you follow the sequence of the investigation. In fact, there was a great deal of pressure, and I represented the FBI at the National Security Council level for us to make a definitive finding that it was, in fact, Iran or the PFLP-GC working for Iran, at which time the government was prepared to take very drastic actions to address the problem. The difficulty was that even with the German investigation, and I went over and met with Dr. Heinrich Boga, the president of the BKA, because we were not satisfied with the intensity of their investigation in the Autumn Leaves affair. And we were operating on the premise that that was the responsible party. But we simply could not bring to bear all of the information that we had and the evidence and make it fit. And then when the item, the microchip, was found and identified, and by the way, it was through both Rarity and also Tom Thurman of the FBI laboratory, independently, we found this other connection, and then we started working on it. And this is all, of course, in a confidential status because you don't disclose evidentiary material in an ongoing investigation. Then the link was found to the Libyans, and then the additional supporting information was determined. But indeed, Iran was the principal suspect through the PFLP-GC, and if we could have identified, then our government would have taken specific and direct action to address that, that
You've
problem.
seen the president of Iran, the ex-president of Iran, saying there in that film, we paid for the job, and these are the guys we paid. Now, I would think, surely, that's something you'd want to question, something you'd want to follow up.
Well, we did indeed hear that, and that was exactly the reason that we were so intent on proving it. But the fact is, there was a separate operation which was intended to do the same thing, but was thwarted by the action of the German police.
Well, you mean you're saying so that was true, that in fact the Iranians paid someone to do the job, paid the Syrians,
indeed.
and they may have got someone else to do it.
I
Now,
don't
if that's
think
the
they paid
case,
the
surely
Syrians.
America should be hostile to Syria.
I said I don't believe that they paid the Syrians. The PFLP-GC was receiving funds from Iran.
But the implication of your suggestion, Secretary Taylor, is that there has been corruption of justice at the highest level, that
I'm
is
not saying
government level.
I can understand why the governments would do it. Don't get me wrong.
But it is
Obviously,
corruption.
Syria's help is needed to try and solve the Palestinian situation. Obviously, Iran's help to some degree is needed when you've got Iran. But on the other hand, what I'm saying is, well, let's try and resolve the problem.
Well,
at the end of the day, unless you get the facts out, everyone's going to carry on with programs like this, with new evidence coming forward, other people saying this. Let's get the issue resolved. And one simple thing,
And how-
Mr. Boulier,
and how
in
we-
fact, who is the person on this famous little tiny thing, he has said, let me see that, and I will tell you whether I sold it to Libya or whether I sold it to someone in East Germany. Now, he has said, let me see it, and unfortunately he's not being allowed to see it. That would worry me, quite honestly, if I was searching for justice.
For the moment, thank you. Where we go from here, we'll look at after this break.
My girlfriend Kirby says I never introduce her to any of my friends. So today I brought one along to meet her. I asked her to take a drive with me down to the beach. I wanted to talk to her. I think I remember proposing to her, and then we tied the knot with a Diet Coke.
Because it's made from recycled paper, new improved Nouvelle is softer on nature and softer on your bottom. Cheeky?
Sorry, Frank. Food's gone off.
Replace your old fridge with a new Zanussi fridge freezer. Its unique cool check feature tells you when your food is stored safely. Zanussi, the appliance of science.
At the Cooperative Bank, our customers know we will never put money into countries with oppressive regimes. But to guarantee our customers are completely happy with our service, we will put our money where our mouth is. Call 0800 90 50 90 now.
This is all completely new. That's where we used to go fishing. Jones Sweet Shop. I wonder if that's still there. Well, they look a lot more fun. Never seen these before. Ah, this is familiar. A friend of mine used to live down here. His dad had a lovely Mercedes.
Welcome back. Now, all or any of the issues we've discussed tonight might be brought up in a trial, but no trial is currently planned. The two indicted suspects are still in Libya. So, Teddy, exactly the thing we heard you complaining about, that the alleged maker of the timer is not able to see the damning piece of evidence that the police in Scotland hold. Now, that might come up in a trial. There's no sign of a trial taking place. Do you actually believe there will ever be a trial?
Sadly, I don't think there will be, because I can't understand why. I don't gain the impression there is a huge anxiety on the part of the UK and the American government to resolve it. Now, that's probably a shocking thing to say, but I genuinely believe this. If they wanted to resolve it, the two men could go, or are said would go, tomorrow to The Hague or anywhere else in the world. Now, of course, they'd say, British law doesn't allow this. British law could be changed in 5 minutes. There was an attempt in the Scottish Committee. Why not don't we allow the two men to go to The Hague, to be tried there, if need be, by a Scottish judge? Now, of course, some people might say, but the Libyans are rascals. They'll agree to it, and then they'll not send them. If that's the case, then I think their guilt is shown. And what I would appeal, for the sake of the relatives, those who lost their lives there, why not try it? Why not say, OK, now it could be done very easily. It would need a small law being passed in Britain to allow a court to take place in The Hague. The Libyans have said, we'll send them there right away. Now, if in fact the Libyans are rascals, as no doubt some people would say, if they didn't send them, then we'd all know. And what I'd appeal is, let's try and get the issue resolved.
Well, I know you were in the House of Commons when Mr. Douglas Hurd gave his arguments against that, and he might have included precedent, although he didn't at that time. But you see a trial in a neutral country as being the only way any trial is going to take place.
Yes, and it's been offered by the Libyans. Now, of course, if they're not telling the truth, that would show they were rascals. I believe they would send them. However, I may be wrong.
Jim Swire, I mean, that suggests that Scottish justice is not fair and would not give the Libyans fair treatment in a court. Would that be your view?
I don't think that's the issue at all. I mean, this should be governed, as I see it, by the Montreal Convention, 1971, which is quite unequivocal. It says that where someone accused of this sort of crime is discovered, they shall either be put on trial under the jurisdiction of the country in which they live or handed over to the country making the complaint. Now, if these guys were put on trial in Libya, everybody would say, oh, it's a show trial. If two Scotsmen were accused of blowing up a Libyan airliner, would they be handed over to Libya? Of course they wouldn't. So why not go for a trial in a neutral country? And the only answer we get from this government is the one given by Lord James Douglas Hamilton when he was busy defeating the clause that Alan Stewart, Conservative MP, was trying to introduce to allow a Scottish court.
Just last month.
Yeah, to allow a Scottish court to sit in a neutral country, when he said the government to take the view that there is no need for the Scottish courts to sit abroad. Of course there's a need, because there are no Libyans to try in Scotland or America. Therefore, try them in a neutral country.
Would the US families, Frank Dugan, welcome a trial being put on in a neutral country?
No, they've said they want the trial in either the United States or the United Kingdom, the way the UN resolution demands. That they want Colonel Gaddafi to do the four things that the UN has called for, and that is to turn over the two bombers, alleged bombers, to renounce terrorism, to talk about the UTA bombing, in which there was some complicity, and to arrange some kind of compensation for the victims. Unless he does those, he's going to stay on that embargo
And there's no
list.
Flexibility amongst the families there, even if, as Sir Teddy Taylor suggests, the only way a trial might be agreed to by the Libyans is if it were held in a neutral country, and Jim Swire would back that as well, speaking for the British families, or at least for a number of the British families.
Is that the feeling of the US families?
David Leppard,
what are we going to
do you agree with this sense of drift that Sir Teddy Taylor identifies, that there's actually a lack of will on the part of the authorities to see this trial happen?
Not at all. I mean, if there was a lack of will, they wouldn't have issued the indictments in the first place and pursued this investigation so thoroughly.
But that is 4 years ago.
And so rigorously. I think the issue here is whether two suspects who are indicted in the murder of 270 people should be allowed to set the terms and conditions of their trial. I've not known a situation like that anywhere else, and it's quite clear. The crime was committed in Scotland. It was also an offence against an American aircraft. There's only two places which have a jurisdiction to try that, and that's Scotland and America. And I don't think we should listen to what Colonel Gaddafi says on this point.
Sheena, can I interrupt there and read out where it actually says Article 7 of the Montreal Convention, to which Britain, America, Libya, France and Germany are all contracting states. It says, the contracting state in the territory of which the alleged offender is found shall, if it does not extradite him, be obliged without exception whatsoever, and whether or not the offence was committed in its territory, to submit the case to its competent authorities for the purpose of prosecution. That's plain enough, without exception whatsoever. So Libya would be in her rights to try them in Libya.
Bakravar, you must be very frustrated by the lack of progress on this. Now, you're now retired, you're not with the FBI anymore. Would you, speaking personally, favour a trial in a neutral country simply to bring this matter to a conclusion?
Well, as far as the evidence, I think it would be compelling wherever it was presented as long as it was a fair and neutral court. But I think there's a terrible problem with precedents, and the convention is very clear that it would have to be one of the countries in which the victims or the event occurred, or the country in which it's found. Now, certainly we could not depend upon Libya, because I think, as the evidence will clearly reveal, that Gaddafi himself would have had to have been involved and approved this type of an operation.
But we do know that Libya are prepared to see a trial take place in The Hague or in Switzerland. So that,
well, they have said that. I haven't seen that completed.
But can I ask you how to explain the fact that the United Nations, who are behind these resolutions, have in fact set up in a matter of months a facility in The Hague for trying Bosnian war criminals? If they can do that, why can't they set up a facility for trying the
You're saying where there's a will, there's a way. Let me ask Mr. Chubin about the Libyan position. I mean, is there any chance that in order to have the UN sanctions lifted, Colonel Gaddafi might think again about releasing the two suspects?
I think it's a trade-off in the Libyan mind between how far these sanctions are going to destabilize the regime, and how far, if they do in fact, if we turn around the discussion and ask, if the only way to settle this is through the courts, why, if the Libyans are convinced, the Libyan government is convinced that they're being fabricated, that the evidence is fabricated, they don't go to get themselves cleared in court. And one suspicion must be, one plausible hypothesis must be the fear that the link to Gaddafi will be clarified. So I think that the Libyan government is prepared to continue this way, angling, fishing, trying to find people who might support its view, knowing it's not possible because of the positions that the United States and Britain have taken and the UN has taken, and therefore essentially continuing this impasse, but not surrendering these two people and showing that it hasn't been involved, because it can't show it.
And therefore, do you think the view...
be tried in The Hague, and these two chaps shouldn't be tried? That's a clear thing. It's happening now.
Yes.
What's the difference?
Do you think these are unhelpful views to express in that case?
I do, yes. These are states who are responsible for the activities of their citizens, if they are indeed responsible for them, or can be held responsible for them. In the case of Bosnia, we've got questions of trying to define statehood. People are fighting over what
we're not going to achieve consensus on this, so I'd like to move on, Jim Swire, to your continuing, as I understand it, call for yet another inquiry. Now, there have been a number of inquiries. What would a further inquiry produce?
Well, relevant to our position in this country, there have been 5 inquiries. But the huge deficiency in every single one of those is that not one of them has addressed the question of the intelligence input to these problems. Now, Lockerbie is an international disaster which inevitably depends on intelligence. And without objective inquiry into what intelligence didn't know, it's hard to believe the official line. And one of the most anguishing parts of all this is the question of the warnings received beforehand, which we saw a bit about in the film. Now, never revealed publicly before, but I have a letter here from the private secretary to the Prime Minister, dated the 7th of March this year, in which he says, it's addressed to a member of our group who'd asked him about the warnings, and he says, you asked about the availability of prior intelligence, in particular about prior warnings. No specific warnings were received before the Lockerbie disaster. Neither the so-called Toshiba or Helsinki warnings, which are often cited, were found to be relevant. How can that man tell us that at this time, 6 years later, with no progress towards a trial for 3 years of that time? How can he suddenly turn around and tell us there were no warnings? We know about those warnings. We believe from Mr. Frankovich's film there are a lot of others as well. I was the guy who was given the Toshiba warning, which showed a picture of the bomb. It had the full text in German about it. I photographed it, and my colour photographs went round the world. How can this man stand up and on behalf of the Prime Minister tell me there were no warnings?
Just before we get onto the detail of warnings, and Frank Dugan, I'd like to bring you in on this. Can you specify exactly what kind of inquiry you would like to see, bearing in mind that your requests have been turned down again and again, and quite recently?
We would like to see an inquiry which has the authority, which I think Mr. Dugan will agree his presidential commission did not have, to subpoena those who have privileged intelligence information. Now, for the reason that that must be included in the remit of the inquiry, I personally have never called for a public inquiry to do this, because clearly such information is not always proper in the public field. It has to be one, however, in which there is a chairman of the inquiry who has the confidence of the relatives and the confidence of the government sufficient that he will be allowed to see relevant intelligence information. Without that, I do not feel confident.
So a parliamentary inquiry, a royal commission, something along the lines of the Scott inquiry?
Maybe Sir Teddy Taylor can advise us on the likely
Can
form
you give
it could
Jim
take.
Swire advice, indeed hope? I suspect you will not give him hope.
I'd like to give hope, but quite honestly, I mean, I have the utmost sympathy with Jim Squire. What I'd say is I have been trying 6, 7 years, goodness, not as much as you have, saying, let's get things moving, and every time you find there's something they say, we can't do this, we can't do that. And at the end of the day, why? That's what I keep on saying. And if we're talking about guilt and innocence, what about the fact that, in fact, in Tripoli, there was bombs dropped there in which children were killed? No one wants an inquiry about that. What about Iran, when you had that plane that was bust to bits with 300 people who were killed in that? No one seems to worry about that. And what I say is, for goodness sake, stop playing international politics because it suits you and find an answer to the problem.
Let's talk about what we
answer
can
is,
do.
I don't think it's going to happen.
Warnings. Jim Swire brought up warnings, and that is a concern too of the American families, that warnings were incompetent, that a two-tier system has operated. Now, since Lockerbie, 6 years on, has the system changed, and is it as good as it could be, Frank Dougan?
Yes, I think so. I think that the families were concerned with that part of the warnings issue, that they thought certain people had access to information and other people didn't.
Which was the case in the context that there was no policy, and therefore some people did, in a haphazard way, get some information and other people
That's
didn't.
correct, having to do with that
Now you have
so-called
a protocol or
Helsinki
a
warning
policy.
that was mentioned in the film. What I find troubling is that most of these things have been looked into, and the American families are quite satisfied with the issue of warnings about people having been allegedly taken off the plane. VIPs were given separate treatment. We looked into those things very carefully. The warnings, the commission looked at 10 years worth of warnings that come to the FAA or to the intelligence services. The total was something like 6,000 warnings. On the film, it was noted they get something like 12 a day. The fact is, over that 10-year period, not one warning, not one ever, was an accurate warning. The ones that are looked into, they averaged about maybe, I think, 20 to over 20 a year. But the fact is that if people want to blow up a plane, they want to blow up the plane. They don't want to give a warning. If terrorists want to bring everything to a halt, then they give warnings.
So the people you represent would see the Helsinki warning as irrelevant, as a coincidence, despite its apparent specificity.
Oh, it was a tragic coincidence, but it was a fraud. The Finnish police even know who made the call. It's astounding to me that you are still talking about this,
you must know,
Squire.
because it says in the report of your commission that the Helsinki warning was not negated as far as Pan Am were concerned at Frankfurt or Heathrow until after the disaster had happened. Therefore, of course it was relevant. They'd been given this thing which said this lady from whatnot was going to produce a bomb and put it on at Frankfurt. They believed that that was a valid warning on the night of the 21st of December. The fact it was rubbish later was irrelevant to the question of whether that warning actually had a meaning for the
We've managed to talk about, as widely as we can, a lot of detail, but I'm going to have to ask you now, Jim Swire, for speaking as representative of the relatives and as the father of Flora, who died on Pan Am 103. What's your priority now at this point?
I see things very personally. I think my daughter would have wanted me to find out who murdered her and see them appropriately punished, and that's basically what I intend to continue to try to do.
So, Teddy Taylor, do you sense that the whole system and process of justice has been corrupted in this country and in America?
I think corrupt's the wrong word to use. I can understand why it's happening. I understand why people want it to happen. I'm not saying in any sense they're crooks, rascals, vagabonds. All I'd say is they only appreciate that all this international politicking, which suits countries, understandably, it's not fair to those who lost lives. We should clarify it, even if it is going to be embarrassing to people who we want to be friends with and we want to work with. Telling people the truth is usually the secret weapon of politics. That's what we need, and quite honestly, if the truth is wanted, the truth can be found. There is a way to do it, we all know how to do it, and I wish it would happen soon.
And on that point, establishing the truth, I think we will find consensus amongst participants tonight. We must end there, but thank you all very much indeed for taking part in this discussion. And I hope you feel that it's been a useful contribution to the continuing public debate over what remains the world's biggest unsolved murder. The British Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd told Parliament earlier this year the investigation remains open. Minds cannot be closed to fresh evidence, even if it were to open up new ideas on who carried out the bombing or backed the bombers. Good night.
Indian Territory.
This is the place where we became mythic in our own minds.
A 6-part series that charts a period of extraordinary change on the American continent and the bitter struggle of two cultures for the Great Plains. European settlers faced with the true West forged a distinct identity, while Native Americans, the Sioux, the Crows, the Arapaho, fought to preserve their own.
So that my people will live, I will sacrifice myself.
A struggle that threw up names that will never be forgotten. Sitting Bull, George Armstrong Custer, Crazy Horse. The Wild West begins Sunday at 8, continuing Monday at 9 on Channel 4.
It's to the Wild North next on 4. More fun with the kids in the hall.
Drive Time. The greatest radio anthems of all time. Your most requested radio hits. Drive Time, the album, is out now.
Where's my fish?
You could save up to 30% on your home contents insurance by dealing direct with a company who will help you sort your claim out there and then over the phone and put things right as swiftly as possible.
Horrible it was. This is the very spot, just here. The jaws of...
For home contents insurance, call free 0800 28 2820 Guardian Direct.
Oh no, we've gone too far this time.
One too many and you might turn 30.
DFS and Northern Upholstery are making an offer that's years ahead of its time, but it ends Sunday, 5 p.m.
You get all the strength of Britain's leading upholstery specialist.
Plus, for the first time ever, you can choose anything. Take 3 years free credit.
And it's free for a year. Yes, you pay nothing for 1 whole year. No deposit, no interest, no payment.
That's nothing till May 1996. An offer years ahead of its time.
Only until Sunday, 5 p.m. Only at DFS and Northern Upholstery.
Squeak, squeak, squeak. How's a dog supposed to get any kip round here?
New Andrex is even softer.
Oh, I'm fed up.
So it's now squeezably soft.
Aha, now there's an idea.
Ooh.
Yeah. Hey, can I borrow that? Wait, excuse me. Go on, go on, go on. Yeah, got it. Oh, peace at last.
New Andrex, so soft it's squeezably soft. Go on, give it a squeeze.
Why a pair of 3D glasses? That's to get a better view of Colgate's first 3-dimensional toothbrush. You see, your teeth aren't flat. They're 3-dimensional. That's why the unique Colgate Total was created. The first layer of bristles are shorter to clean the surface of the teeth. Colgate Total also has a second layer of bristles. These are a little longer to clean right in between your teeth. Why am I standing at this angle? Well, that's the third dimension. Angled bristles to gently clean plaque away from the gum line. Try Colgate Total for a 3-dimensional clean.
Nice car. Want to show me what it can do?
Hi, girls, where's your mother?
Right here. Nice car.
The Peugeot 306 drives the imagination.
Hello, I am Princess Diana.
And I am Prince Charles.
Also known as Jean-Paul Gaultier.
And Antoine Decaune.
And yes, my British chums, we are back.
For this fourth series of Eurotrash, we bring you an especially bizarre collection of Euro culture. It will excite you, it will disgust you, it will make you beg for more.
And best of all, it is got Harry and William, I mean Pippi and Popo.
The new series of Eurotrash, tomorrow 10:55 on the Channel 4.
Now on 4, a little later than planned, it's the last in the series for those kids in the hall.
Oh yeah, I love that. I absolutely love it. Really? That is well, I thought beach volleyball. Okay. Beach volleyball is very dangerous. What's very competitive? No, yes. You want to be treated like that. We care.
Hey, Carl! Look, man, they discovered a cure for impotency. Check it out. It's still a couple years down the road, but you're a man on a comeback, sir.
What the hell was that all about? You were so insensitive. Look at him. Look at him.
I still feel logy.
Me too, Kathy. I just can't get started this morning, and it's already 11:30.
And